For those of us who grew up watching Bollywood, or Hindi cinema as it prefers to be known, respectful and three-dimensional depictions of women seemed few and far in between at times. Not always, but oftentimes the female protagonists either serve as a love interest trapped behind the male gaze to reward or entertain the hero, or appear as vamps who brought about deceit and destruction of wholesome bonds. In her article, Bollywood's Troubled Relationship with Women, Shubhra Gupta writes, "The female lead as a decorative prop has been a mainstay in all major film industries in India. If there is a hero, he's at the forefront. A heroine's chief job is to worship and adore, and get out of the way when the heroes come out to play. It wasn't always like this. Just like the feisty yesteryear ladies of Hollywood, there were Bollywood heroines standing up and being counted. Those were the early years of cinema, and filmmakers were using movies as a tool to explore taboo topics like caste and class. But things changed after the socially conscious 1950s. During and after the 1960s, when entertainment became the chief metric of the movies, the gaze has been so primarily male that female actors became largely secondary citizens. Demeaning dialogues laced with misogyny are so commonplace that we don't even notice. Leading ladies are often compared to cars with shining woodwork which need to be pushed into action. These issues still persist today, but an increased feminist conscience has ushered in more complex, layered portrayals of the female perspective. This list consists of films I think provide an introspective glance into the lives of women, both from the New Age and yesteryear movies that were ahead of their time. This list is not definitive or absolute in any way. There are other movies that fit this criteria but aren't included here. I merely wanted to share the films that shaped my love and perception of women in South Asian society. In no particular order, here they are. Piku, a modern classic as far as I'm concerned. The narrative follows a 30-something working woman who finds her life at a stalemate thanks to her hypochondriac father that she is stuck living with. What makes this movie so great is that it's not afraid to show its leading lady in an unfavorable light, because it only serves to make her frustrations and weaknesses more real. Like any other human being experiencing stress and sadness, Piku sometimes struggles to be good to those around her. The jaded trope of daughters being more than happy to obediently sacrifice their needs and desires in the servitude of family is rejected here. It's painfully honest about how stagnating and frustrating it can be when parents become dependent on you in old age and refuse to respect your boundaries and are unwilling to accommodate any space for individuality and change. And that more importantly, it doesn't make you an ungrateful daughter to feel unhappy about it. It's a feeling many modern South Asian women like myself relate to. A bumpy road trip well worth the ride. God, I'm being so cheesy with the puns in this video. Sita or Geeta. Though some aspects of the film definitely reflect the problematic attitudes of its era, the message and nuances of this 1972 classic definitely felt ahead of its time. Featuring silver screen icon Hema Malini in an impressive double role, it tells the tale of twin sisters, separated at birth and unaware of each other's existence, who end up trading places in a twist of fate. When Sita, the more desolate of the two, is told that her knight in shining armor will come and rescue her one day, the shot cuts to a bold and vivacious Geeta, foreshadowing a sisterly savior rather than a traditional leading man. In another scene, Sanjeev Kumar's character describes his ideal wife to be homely, obedient, and demure. Instead, the film has him fall for Geeta, challenging his expectations and views on women. Plus, watching abusers get their comeuppance is always satisfying.
और तू बैठकर राज करेगा, कुत्ते?
Queen. This delightful romp from Delhi to Paris to Amsterdam centers around a jilted bride who decides to go on her would-be honeymoon by herself. The titular protagonist, Rani, slowly crawls out of her shell throughout the film, striking up a hearty friendship with a woman who shares her ex-fiancé's name, who perhaps in a less heteronormative society might have been considered a potential love interest in the film. In the second half of the movie, Rani realizes that platonic relationships with men are both possible and normal when you don't have intrusive, judgmental eyes leering on you. There are several instances in the film where Rani's values and expectations are deconstructed from the narrow mentality that can so easily develop over time. It's a journey of self-love, self-worth, friendship, and happiness that you won't regret embarking on. Again, so sorry about these puns. English. Bollywood rarely dedicates films to middle-aged women, let alone light-hearted ones that aren't steeped in struggle and tragedy. Which is why English came in like a breath of fresh air in 2012, heralding the much-anticipated but sadly short-lived comeback of the late and beloved Sridevi. She proved that actresses her age could still be leading women and carry a film to box office success. It struck an emotional chord with me because it reminded me of my mom and other immigrant mothers who leave their old lives behind for new countries whose languages they have to learn from scratch. The English lessons that start off as a desperate need for validation from a modern world and acceptance into its Anglophilic rituals slowly morph into a genuine thirst for knowledge and desire for friendships. Dor. Having watched this as a child, I consider it largely responsible for my insatiable appetite for seeing intricate female bonds on screen. Set between Kashmir and Rajasthan, two vastly different climates in terms of both terrain and culture, it ties together the lives of two women. Polar opposites in many ways, they find common ground in this story about loss, love, and the limited liberties of our women. Lajja. In the early 2000s, Bollywood saw a boom in movies about social justice. Part of that slate, Lajja chronicles misogynistic abuse faced by women all over India of all ages and creeds. It manages to effectively tackle an array of issues like female infanticide, dowry, and domestic violence. It also boasts of a stellar A-list cast. Heartbreaking and empowering, it sheds a much-needed light on victims of patriarchy trying to escape a system designed to kill and silence them. Ek Hasina Thi. An underrated and oft-forgotten gem, this Urmila Matondkar and Saif Ali Khan starrer is a devilishly entertaining neo-noir thriller about the fury of a woman scorned. When an ordinary mousy woman is framed from the possession of illegal firearms by her two-faced boyfriend, she comes out of prison a changed person. Molded by an innate streak for survival and hunger for revenge, she comes back into his life to beat him at his own game. The movie does a really good job of highlighting the anxiety and danger faced by women living on their own. The protagonist constantly finds herself fending off unsolicited advances by men who can't seem to take no for an answer. It's a surprisingly insightful look into how women are antagonized for asserting themselves and how femininity can be weaponized for safety. Pinjar. This is yet another Urmila offering. Quite honestly, she did a lot to advance women-centric films in Hindi cinema back when such stories had all but disappeared. She carried so many commercial movies on her shoulders, and I think it's time to give her credit for that. This film of hers is based on a novel by Amrita Pritam and set during the partition. It tells the story of Puro, a Hindu girl who gets kidnapped by a Muslim man over an old ancestral dispute. While there are problematic elements to the story, the overall message doesn't miss. The recurring imagery of birds in a cage and the shattering of a subcontinent are woven throughout the narrative. It's a heartbreaking story about how women are burdened with upholding family honor and that it's always their bodies that serve as a battleground in both political and personal wars orchestrated by men. Chameli. Sometimes a film through a feminist lens isn't always one where women rise triumphant and victorious over the ashes of their oppressors. Sometimes it's just as imperative to use the medium of cinema to humanize those factions of women that are maligned and alienated by our society. And Chameli does just that. It begins when a depressed businessman's car breaks down in a rough neighborhood during a heavy monsoon night. He soon finds himself stuck with a sex worker who, after trying to solicit him as a customer, becomes a companion and confidant until dawn. Chameli appears acerbic and nonchalant about her vocation, but Kareena Kapoor's brilliant layered performance lets morsels of the character's trauma and tragedy float to the surface to give us a glimpse into a grim reality. The film extends empathy towards sex workers and other destitute characters of Mumbai's underbelly, while acknowledging that the real stain on society's fabric are those who create the supply and demand for commodification of girls and women, and that it is nothing less than normal to treat a sex worker with respect and dignity as you would a businessman. Margarita with a Straw. I was so pleasantly surprised by this movie. It's not uncommon for Bollywood films to feature disabled protagonists. Unfortunately, it's rarely nuanced and usually exists to serve as gratitude porn. Margarita with a Straw is a wonderful coming-of-age story about a girl with cerebral palsy and her strive to live an independent and fulfilling life. It does not attempt to be a polished meditation on the human spirit or attainment of so-called normalcy. It never shies away from expressing the protagonist's sexuality, her lapses in judgment, or irrational outbursts. It never shows her as anything other than completely and ordinarily human. It's also one of the few Bollywood movies where the protagonist is part of the LGBTQ community and openly features her in a relationship with another disabled woman. No implications or metaphors, just a candid depiction of same-sex romance. I don't think it's my place as an able-bodied person to define the message of this film, but I can point out that it is emphatic in its endorsement of the very simple fact that women do not exist to achieve sainthood. What are your favorite feminist films from Hindi cinema? Which ones had a major impact on you, and which do you think were game changers in the industry? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.